The concept of home is supposed to be a safe, permanent feeling. It is the place where you keep your childhood toys, where you know the creaks and the floorboards, and where you feel the most secure. But for a young boy named Keanu, this idea was foreign. Home was not a building. It was a suitcase he was always learning to pack. His life began in the heat of Beirut, a place of vibrant culture and noise. But before he could truly form memories of the city, his world was shifted. He was just a toddler when his family moved, and that movement never really stopped. Growing up, Keanu became a master at saying goodbye. He lived in Sydney, Australia, for a while, feeling the sun on a different continent. Then he was moved to New York, a city of concrete and speed that felt overwhelming. Finally, they settled in Toronto, Canada. For most children, Toronto might have been the final stop, a place to plant roots. But for Keanu, it was just another location on a long list. He attended 4 different high schools in just 5 years. Imagine trying to make friends when you know you might not be there to finish the semester with them. It taught him to be adaptable, to observe people quickly, but it also built a wall around him. If you don't let people in too deep, it doesn't hurt as much when you have to leave them behind. Beneath the constant moving was a deeper, sharper pain. His father, a man named Samuel, was largely absent from the picture. When Keanu was very small, his father left the family. He didn't just leave the house. He left the country and the boy's life entirely. There were no weekend visits, no phone calls, no guidance on how to grow into a man. The silence from his father was loud. Keanu was left with a mother who loved him deeply, but was struggling to find her own footing. She was a costume designer, a woman with a free spirit and a restless heart. She married multiple times as Keanu grew up, tried to build a family structure that kept crumbling. These stepfathers came and went. One moment there was a new male figure in the house. The next moment, he was gone. This pattern taught Keanu a harsh lesson about love and stability early on. Nothing lasts forever. People leave. The only constants in his life were his mother and his sisters. He became incredibly protective of them, feeling a need to be the man of the house even though he was just a boy. But this responsibility weighed heavily on small shoulders. He was the son, the brother, and the protector all at once, while inside, he still just wanted to be taken care of. School was another battlefield. As he moved from school to school, he carried a secret burden that made every day a struggle. He had dyslexia. In those days, learning disabilities weren't understood or handled with the care they are today. Teachers saw a quiet boy who struggled to read, who couldn't focus on the text, and who often seemed to be in his own world. They didn't see a creative mind. They saw someone who wasn't trying hard enough. He was often called slow or dim-witted. Imagine sitting in a classroom filled with your peers, feeling the words on the page dancing around, refusing to make sense, while the teacher sighs and moves on to the next student. The humiliation was constant. He would be asked to read out loud, and the letters would jumble together, leading to snickers from the back of the room. He was expelled from one school for being too rambunctious, which was likely just a confused boy acting out the frustration he couldn't express in words. The academic world told him he wasn't smart enough. It crushed his self-esteem. He began to believe the voices that said he wouldn't amount to much. But Keanu had a fire inside him that refused to go out, even if he didn't know how to express it in an essay. He found his escape not in books, but on the ice. Ice hockey became his sanctuary. It was a world where reading didn't matter, and words weren't needed. On the rink, the communication was physical. It was about speed, reflex, and grit. He was a good hockey player, known as an aggressive goalie who wasn't afraid to block a puck with his body if he had to. He played for his high school teams and was even nicknamed the Wall because he was so hard to get past. In that freezing cold arena, with the smell of ice and sweat in the air, he felt powerful. When he was on the ice, he wasn't the kid with no dad or the struggling student. He was a warrior. However, as he grew older, the reality of his future set in. Professional hockey was a long shot, and he knew he couldn't stay in Toronto forever. The pull to create something, to tell stories, began to replace the urge to play sports. His stepfather at one point had been a director, and perhaps that planted a seed in Keanu's mind. He realized that acting could be a way to step into other people's shoes, to live 1,000 lives instead of just his own difficult one. It was a chance to be heard without having to be smart in the traditional sense. So, at the age of 20, with nothing but a beat-up old car and a handful of dreams, he made the biggest decision of his life. He decided to leave Toronto behind. He packed his belongings into his vehicle, said goodbye to his mother and sisters, and pointed his car toward the border. He was heading to Los Angeles, the city of stars. It was a terrifying risk. He had no money, no connections, and no guarantees. He was just a troubled kid with a history of abandonment and a burning desire to prove he was worth something. As he drove down the highway, watching the landscape change, he must have felt a mix of fear and exhilaration. He was leaving behind the instability of his childhood, but he was also driving straight into the unknown. He was choosing to be alone in a city of millions. This was the moment the boys stopped drifting and started fighting, though he had no idea that the fight ahead would test his spirit in ways he could never imagine. The smile he would show the world years later was born in these moments of quiet desperation, a shield he was learning to forge against the pain of his past. When he first arrived in Los Angeles, the city didn't roll out the red carpet. It was more like a long, dusty road of rejection. He lived in cheap apartments and sometimes even in his car, scraping by on commercials and small TV roles. But he had a look that was different, a mix of toughness and vulnerability that camera lenses loved. Eventually, the hard work paid off, but not in the way he expected. He didn't get a serious drama role first. He got a comedy that would change his life forever. It was called Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. It was a movie about two not-so-bright teenagers who travel through time in a phone booth. The character was goofy, sweet, and harmless. Keanu played the role with his whole heart. He became Ted, the airhead who just wanted everyone to be excellent to each other. The world fell in love with him. He became famous. Suddenly, the boy who was called Slow in school was a household name. He had money in his pocket and a future that looked bright. He could finally buy a nice house, maybe even start feeling like he belonged somewhere. But fame is a tricky thing. It puts you on a pedestal where the air is thin and lonely. While he was traveling the world promoting the movie, he met someone who would become more than just a colleague. He met River Phoenix. River was already a star, known for his incredible talent and his deep, soulful eyes. They were cast together in a movie called I Love You to Death, and that is where their story really begins. They weren't just co-stars, they became brothers. You could see in the way they looked at each other. They understood each other in a way that no one else in Hollywood could. They both came from strange, nomadic families. They both grew up too fast. They both felt the weight of the world on their shoulders. They spent hours talking about music, about life, and about the pain of living in the spotlight. They even played in a band together, just for fun of it, making loud music in garages when they weren't on set. For a few years, it seemed like Keanu had found the anchor he had been missing his entire life. River was the person he could call when things got dark. They were part of a group of young actors who were changing the industry, a group that cared about art, not just money. Keanu was happy, truly happy. He was making serious movies like Point Break and My Own Private Idaho, showing the world he was more than just a woke guy from the time travel movie. He felt strong. He felt like he had a family he chose for himself. However, the darkness that had followed Keanu since childhood was lurking nearby, waiting to strike again. It didn't come for him this time. It came for his best friend. River was struggling. The pressure of fame, the weight of his past, and the temptations of the lifestyle were pulling him under. Keanu saw it, but like anyone who loves someone, he probably thought River would pull through. He thought they had time. The night it happened was a nightmare come to life. It was October 1993. Keanu was far away, filming on location in the desert heat of Mexico. He was working hard, focused on his craft, thinking about the future. Then he got the call. You know that feeling when the phone rings late at night and your stomach drops before you even pick it up? That was this moment. The voice on the other end told him the unthinkable. River was gone. He had collapsed outside a club in Los Angeles, surrounded by people, cameras, and noise. His heart had stopped. He was only 23 years old. The silence that followed for Keanu was deafening. Thousands of miles away from home, in a strange place, he had to process that his other half was gone. The brother who understood his soul was never coming back. He couldn't fly back immediately. He had to sit with the grief, alone in a hotel room, while the rest of the world moved on. It felt unfair. It felt cruel. River was the good guy, the talented one, the one with a bright future. Why him? Keanu flew back for the funeral, but the pain was too big for tears. He walked through the crowds of reporters and photographers like a ghost. He saw River's family, saw the heartbreak on their faces, and felt his own heart shatter all over again. He realized then that the safety he thought he had found was an illusion. The people you love could be taken away in a blink of an eye. What made it even harder was the timing. Just a few months after River's death, Keanu's biggest action movie, Speed, was about to be released. This was the movie that was supposed to make him a global superstar. The posters were everywhere. The trailers were on TV every 5 minutes. He was playing a hero who saves people on a bus. But in real life, he couldn't save his best friend. Imagine having to smile for cameras, do interviews, and pretend to be excited about a movie when your heart is broken into a million pieces. He did it because he had to. He was a professional. But the light in his eyes had changed. The world saw a movie star. He saw a man who was just trying to survive the day. The joy of success was tainted with the bitterness of loss. Every time someone cheered for him, a part of him wondered if River was watching, or if it even mattered anymore. He learned a terrible lesson during this time. He learned that happiness is fragile. Just when you think you have it all figured out, life can knock you down harder than ever before. The boy who moved from city to city, who never had a real home, had finally built a home inside his friendship with River. Now that house was empty. He was back to being the drifter, but this time he wasn't drifting through cities. He was drifting through his own life, unsure where the ground was. This was the turning point. The pain was no longer just something from his childhood. It was a living, breathing thing that sat right next to him. And the sad part was, the tragedy wasn't finished with him yet. After the crushing weight of losing his best friend, Keanu found himself walking through a gray world. The color had been drained out of his life, and the future looked like a long, empty tunnel. But sometimes when you are in the darkest place, a small light appears. For him, that light was a woman named Jennifer. She was a movie star. She worked behind the scenes in the industry. She was a production assistant and an actress. But more importantly, she had a gentle soul that seemed to understand the quiet pain Keanu was carrying. They met at a party in Hollywood, but instead of the loud, shallow conversations he was used to, they actually talked. Jennifer saw past the famous face and the action star persona. She saw a man who was lonely and who needed a place to rest. For Keanu, being with Jennifer felt like coming in out of the cold. She became his safe harbor. They fell in love deeply and quickly. It wasn't a Hollywood romance full of red carpets and flashing cameras. It was a real, private relationship built on late nights, shared meals, and the comfort of just sitting together in silence. For the first time in a long time, Keanu allowed himself to dream of a normal life. He bought a house, a real place to settle down. He wasn't a drifter anymore. He and Jennifer moved in together, and they started building a home. It was a kind of domestic happiness he had watched from a distance as a child. But the happiness didn't stop there. Soon, they received the news that would change everything forever. Jennifer was pregnant. You have to understand what this meant to him. Keanu had grown up without a father, watching the men in his life leave one by one. He had spent his childhood moving from place to place, never putting down roots. Now, he was going to be a father. It was his chance to break the cycle. He was going to be the dad he never had. He was going to give this child the stability and love that he had craved for so long. He was overjoyed. He started preparing. He talked about names. He looked at baby clothes. And he thought about teaching his son or daughter how to play hockey, just like he did. The void in his heart was finally being filled. As the months went by, the excitement grew. The nursery was ready. The toys were bought. Keanu was filming The Matrix during this time, a movie that required immense physical dedication. He was training for hours every day, doing martial arts and hanging from wires. But his mind was always at home with Jennifer. He would rush back to the house just to feel the baby kick or to talk to Jennifer's belly. He was ready. He was going to be a family man. However, life has a way of shattering our happiest moments when we least expect it. In 1999, when the baby was due to arrive, something went terribly wrong. It wasn't a dramatic accident or a sudden illness that made the news headlines. It was a quiet, devastating tragedy that happened behind closed doors. The baby, a daughter they had already named Ava, was stillborn. There are no words to describe that kind of pain. Imagine holding everything you ever wanted in your hands, and then in a split second, it's gone. Keanu and Jennifer had to go into that hospital full of hope and leave with empty arms. The silence in the room must have been deafening. The joy of anticipation was replaced by a cold, heavy sorrow. Keanu, who had already lost his father figure and his best friend, now had to bury his own child. The couple was devastated. They held a small, private funeral for Ava. It was the hardest thing Keanu had ever done. He stood there, looking at a tiny casket, realizing that all his dreams of being a father were dust. The pain was physical, a sharp ache in his chest that never went away. He couldn't fix this. He couldn't work hard enough or be strong enough to bring her back. Grief is a powerful force, and it affects everyone differently. For a while, Keanu and Jennifer leaned on each other. They were the only two people in the world who understood exactly how the other felt. But slowly, the tragedy began to pull them apart instead of bringing them together. Every time they looked at each other, they were reminded of what they had lost. The house that was once full of dreams became a house full of ghosts. The empty nursery was a constant reminder of their heartbreak. They tried to make it work. They tried to find their way back to each other. But the sadness was just too big. It was like a wall growing between them, brick by brick. A few years after the loss, they made the painful decision to separate. It wasn't because they stopped loving each other. It was because the pain was too heavy to carry together. They needed to breathe, to try and find a way to live again without drowning in the sorrow. Keanu was left alone again. The silence of the house must have been overwhelming. He had gone from the high of the Matrix, making him a global superstar, to the low of losing the most important thing in his personal life. He didn't talk about it in interviews. He didn't go on talk shows and cry. He kept his pain locked inside, just like he did when he was a little boy moving to a new school. He put on a brave face and went back to work. He threw himself into the physically demanding role of Neo, fighting agents and dodging bullets on screen. While inside, he was fighting a battle no one could see. This period of his life defined him in a way that acting never could. He learned that life is incredibly fragile. He learned that no matter how much money you have or how famous you are, you cannot protect yourself from heartbreak. The boy who wanted a family was now a man who had lost his chance to create one. He walked through the world with a deeper sadness, a shadow that followed him everywhere. But even in this darkness, he didn't become bitter. He didn't lash out at the world. He just became quieter, more careful, more grateful for the small moments of peace he could find. The tragedy had broken his heart, but it hadn't broken his spirit. He was still standing, even if he was standing alone. After the heartbreak of losing his daughter, Keanu tried to find a way to breathe again. It was a slow, painful process. He and Jennifer, the mother of his child, tried to remain friends. They were bound together by the deep, unspoken sorrow of losing their baby. It wasn't a romantic relationship anymore, but it was a vital connection. They were the only two people on earth who truly understood the specific weight of that grief. They would meet for coffee or talk on the phone, check in on each other, try and navigate a world that felt gray and empty. For a couple of years, Keanu threw himself into his work. He was filming the Matrix sequels back to back. The job was physically exhausting. He spent his days doing martial arts, hanging from wires, and fighting enemies in a digital world. Maybe the physical pain of training was a welcome distraction from the emotional pain in his heart. When you are kicking and punching and running, you don't have time to think about silence. You don't have time to stare at the empty room in your house where a nursery was supposed to be. Just when he thought the storm had passed, just when he thought he had paid his dues to fate, tragedy struck again. It was the spring of 2001. Keanu was in the middle of filming, focused on the script and the stunts. Then he received the news. It was the kind of news that stops your heart and makes the ground beneath you feel unstable. Jennifer had been in a car accident. She hadn't survived. The déjà vu must have been suffocating. It felt like a terrible, repeating nightmare. First, his father left. Then his best friend died. Then his baby daughter was taken. Now, the woman he loved The mother of his child was gone too. She was only 28 years old. The universe seemed to be testing the very limits of the human spirit, testing how much one heart could break before it stopped beating altogether. He attended the funeral, surrounded by people who were grieving, but he stood apart. He had to say goodbye to another piece of his soul. He looked at the faces of her family members and saw his own pain reflected back at him. It wasn't just the loss of a partner. It was the closing of a chapter. Any hope of rekindling what they had, any hope of healing that old wound together, was gone. Now, the wound was permanent. He was truly alone in his grief. The link between his past and his future had been severed. During this time, the world started to notice a change in him. There's a famous photograph that went around the internet a few years later. It shows Keanu sitting on a small park bench in New York City. He is wearing a light suit, holding a sandwich in one hand and a coffee in the other. He isn't looking at the camera. He is looking down the ground, his face etched with a deep, quiet sadness. The internet exploded with the image. People turned it into a joke. They called him Sad Keanu. They added funny captions about his loneliness or his sandwich. They laughed at his solitude. But they didn't know the truth. They didn't know that this wasn't just a man having a bad day. This was a man who was carrying the heavy coffins of his daughter and his partner in his heart wherever he went. They saw a lonely actor. They didn't see a survivor of a life that seemed determined to break him. It is strange how cruel the world can be without even meaning to be. While people were making memes, Keanu was just trying to get through the day. He was dealing with the immense pressure of being the star of a massive blockbuster movie franchise, while his private life was falling apart. He had to promote the movie, smile for red carpets, and answer questions about fighting robots, all while his mind was consumed with thoughts of life and death. What is incredible, however, is that he didn't let this darkness turn him into a monster. He didn't lash out at the world. He didn't become bitter or angry at the photographers who hounded him. He didn't turn to drugs or alcohol to escape the pain, which is a path many people in his position might have taken. Instead, he became quieter. He became more polite, more gentle, as if he knew that everyone else was fighting their own hard battles too. Around the same time, another tragedy was waiting in the wings. His sister, Kim, the one constant person in his life, since they were children moving from city to city, got sick. She was diagnosed with leukemia. This was the final blow. The one person he had left, the one who shared his DNA and his memories, was fighting for her life. Watching his sister get sick changed something in Keanu. It snapped him out of his own despair. He realized that while he had lost so much, he still had her, and he was not going to lose her without a fight. He stopped feeling sorry for himself and started using his resources to help her. He paid for the best doctors. He flew her to specialists. He became her protector, her caregiver, and her brother all rolled into one. He would spend his days on set being an action hero, and his evenings in the hospital, sitting by her bedside. He didn't want the media to know about it. He didn't want praise for it. He just wanted his sister to live. It was a turning point for him. The man who was known as the lonely guy on the bench was actually a man who was spending his millions and his energy trying to save the only family he had left. He learned a hard lesson during these years. He learned that life is incredibly fragile and unfair. Bad things happen to good people, and sometimes there is no reason for it. But he also learned that the only way to fight the darkness is to be a light for someone else. He couldn't save River. He couldn't save Jennifer. He couldn't save Ava. But he could try to save Kim. And in trying to help her, he was slowly saving himself. He was learning that the greatest gift you can give is your presence, your time, and your love, especially when you have every reason to turn your back on the world. The battle with his sister's illness lasted for a long, grueling decade. Keanu spent a fortune on doctors and treatments, not for fame, but just to keep his sister breathing. He didn't talk about it to the press. To the world, he was an action star. To Kim, he was just her brother who brought her soup and sat by her hospital bed for hours, reading to her or just holding her hand when the pain got bad. He was determined to be the family he never had. Eventually, the tide turned. The treatments worked. Kim went into remission. It was the first piece of good news he had received in years. It didn't erase the pain of the past, but it stopped the bleeding. It gave him a reason to smile again, A genuine one this time. With his sister safe, Keanu looked at his own life. By this point, he was one of the most famous actors on the planet. He had earned millions of dollars from Matrix and other hits. Most men in his position would buy a massive mansion with high walls, surround themselves with bodyguards, and never talk to a normal person again. Keanu did the opposite. He lived out of a suitcase for years, staying in hotels because he felt uncomfortable in a big empty house. When he did buy a place, it was modest and functional. He didn't want a fortress. He just wanted a place to keep his motorcycle and his books. You would often see him walking down the street in New York City, wearing a beat-up jacket and carrying his own helmet. He didn't have an entourage. He didn't have people running around fetching him coffee. He stood in line at delis like everyone else. There's a famous story where he was sitting on the subway, eating a simple snack, and he gave up his seat for an older woman standing nearby. He didn't do it for the cameras. He did it because that is how his mother raised him. He understood that having a lot of money didn't make him better than anyone else. In fact, it seemed to make him more humble. He knew that money could buy doctors, but couldn't buy back the people he lost. Hollywood could be a cruel place, full of big egos and selfishness. Keanu became a legend there for a different reason: his kindness. When he filmed the Matrix sequels, he knew that the stunt team was doing the most dangerous work. They were jumping off buildings and getting hit by cars while he just had to look cool. He wanted to thank them. So he took a portion of his own salary, a massive amount of money, and bought each member of the stunt team a brand new Harley-Davidson motorcycle. He didn't make a big announcement about it. He just gave them the keys. He did again years later on the set of John Wick, giving out personalized Rolex Submariner watches to the crew members who worked the hardest. Why did he do this? Because he knew what it felt like to be the little guy. He knew what it felt like to struggle. He wanted to make sure the people who worked hard felt appreciated. He treated the script supervisors and the catering staff with the same respect as the famous directors. If he bumped into someone on the street, he would stop and apologize sincerely. He wasn't the sad Keanu the internet made fun of. He was kind Keanu, a man who had every reason to be angry, but chose to be gentle. As he got older, interviewers started asking him deeper questions. They asked him about the pain he had suffered. They asked him what he thinks happens when we die. His answer was simple and heartbreaking. He said, "I know that the ones who love us will miss us." That was it. No long speech about heaven or hell. Just the simple truth that love leaves a mark. He didn't fear death because he had seen it up close, and he knew that love was the only thing that survived it. He carried his tragedies with him like old friends. He didn't try to hide them anymore, but he didn't let them define him completely. He found a way to live with the grief. It was like a scar that aches when the weather changes, but doesn't bleed anymore. He threw himself into making movies again, specifically the John Wick series. It was ironic. He played a man who loses his wife and then loses his dog, sparking a rage that destroys the criminal underworld. Art imitated life, but with a different ending. John Wick sought revenge. Keanu sought peace. Even with all the success, he kept his life simple. He was known for wearing the same boots for years, or the same suit to events because he liked it and didn't care about fashion trends. He loved books and music. He would often be seen browsing in a bookstore, just enjoying the quiet. He didn't date publicly for a long time, protecting his heart and the hearts of others. But eventually, he did find love again later in life, showing the world that it is never too late to heal. Today, if you see Keanu Reeves, you might notice the lines on his face. He has earned every single one of them. He doesn't look like the polished, perfect plastic dolls that often fill movie screens. He looks real. When he smiles, it's not the fake smile of a politician. It's a crooked, hesitant smile that reaches his eyes. It is the smile of a man who has walked through fire and came out the other side. He didn't let the world make him hard. He didn't let the pain turn him into stone. Instead, he became soft in a way that is incredibly strong. He learned that the best way to honor the people he lost, the father who left, the friend who died, the girlfriend who crashed, the baby who never cried, was to live a good life, to be kind, to help a stranger, to make someone laugh. The tragic life story of Keanu Reeves isn't really a story about tragedy. It is a story about survival. It is about a man who was handed a script full of sadness and decided to rewrite the ending. He shows us that you can be broken, you can be lonely, and you can lose everything, but you can still choose to be a good person. You can still choose to offer a hand to someone else who is falling. That is the real victory, not the money or the fame or the movies. It is a choice to keep your heart open, even when the world tries to crush it. He is proof that the kindest people are often the ones who have survived the most.